All right, welcome back. So last time we learned about for loops and while loops. Remember when I said something about break? Well, today we're going to learn about that. We're going to learn about two commands, which is break and continue. So in Python, there's something called a break. It's something that's related to loops. And there's something kind of like a close cousin called continue. So what it does is in Python, break and continue statements, they can alter the flow of a normal loop, because sometimes you wish to terminate the current iteration or even the whole loop without checking the test expression. So let's look at this slide. This is for break. All right, so you can see the command here and here. So let's look at the while loop first, because that's the first one we learned. So whenever we're in the while loop, and if ever we come to this command, which is the break command, instead of going back to the loop and looking at the test expression, the moment you see break, it's gonna go out of the loop. So imagine if you have like another command here, which is like print done loop. And also imagine if this expression was always true. Let's say we had I equals 0, and here it's I is smaller than 4. But then if this condition was maybe I equals 2, then once I is equal to 2, it's gonna go to this statement, which is the break statement. And the break statement will break out of the loop for you. So it's gonna go right away to the next statement outside of the loop. So instead, like if we didn't have this break statement, it would go back to the test expression, which in our case is I is smaller than 4. And because I equals to 2, then it's still true. Then you're gonna continue the loop. But like I said, break or continue, this time we're talking about break, what it can do is it can break out of the iteration or even the whole loop. So for break, it breaks out of the whole loop. For continue, we terminate just the current iteration. I'll talk more about continue later. So yeah, so the great thing about this is it adds flexibility to your for loops or your while loops so that you don't always have to do a full loop in some sense. It's even better for the for loops because in for loops, as you know, it's a little bit less flexible. It's easier to write, but less flexible, because what it does is it loops over the whole list, right? But what if you don't want to loop over the whole list? What if looping halfway through the list, you already achieved what you want, right? So here, same thing. If you have a break statement, then instead of looping through the whole array, it's gonna go right to the end of the loop and execute the rest of your program or function. So why don't we look at an example so that we can actually understand why we should use a break. So here we have an example. I want you to write, well, I'm going to write it, but I want you to write this function, which determines if a list contains at least one number that is even. And we are going to use a loop for that because we want to loop through the whole array or the whole list to find one number that is even. Okay, let's just do it without breaks or continues, because let's assume that we didn't learn that yet. So how would you do that? So how I would do it is first, I want to have a Boolean. The Boolean is called has even number because what I want to do is I want to iterate through the whole list. And if I see an even number, then I'm going to set that to true. So let's just say has, too bad it's the same. It's the same name as the function. So let's just call it has even. First, it's false. So that means if your list is empty, it's going to return false, right? At the end, I want to return this variable. Okay. And then what I want to do is for each number on the list, so I'll call it for num in list, LST for short, then if num modulo 2 equals 0, that means the number is even, then has even, I will set that to true. Okay. If it's odd, then I won't do anything. The reason why I won't do anything is because has even is already set to false, and all I need is one of the numbers to be even for my function to return true. So in some sense, you're kind of re-implementing OR, the OR statement. If you remember when we talked about Boolean, there's an AND statement, there's an OR statement. All right, so let's see if this works. Okay, has even number. Let's give it a list, 1, 2, 3. It returns true. Let's give it 1, 5, 3. It gives it false. Okay, great. So it works. Now, what if the list was like this? 3, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, right? Like it's still gonna be really fast, but if you think about it, if you, as a human, we look at the list and we see 1, okay, then there isn't an even number yet. But once you see 2, you know there's an even number in the list. So why do you need to look at the rest of the list? You probably don't need to, right? So can we shorten this while loop with something that we just learned? Yes, we can use the break operator. So what if I don't need to loop through the whole list? All I need to do is the moment I find an even number, I'm just gonna output true. Why don't I just do that? So what if I break here? So what would that do? Let's try it out. So that means the moment I see an even number, it's gonna break out of this loop. So that means I won't start the next iteration. I will go directly here, which is a return function. So let's try this again. Has even number 1, 3, 2, 3. Oops, I have misspelled it. All right, it gives me true. And if it's 5, so it gives me the same output, so which is good. But you don't really see any difference here, right? So I'm gonna do something so that you can actually visualize it a little bit better. I can say now looking at plus string num. So I added a print statement so that you can actually follow through what the function is actually doing. And let's remove the break for now. Oh, let's comment it out. Has even number list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So as you can see, the loop is looking at the first number, which is 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and then it outputs true. And then one more thing I can do, I can also print has even, and then print its value. Let's see, I wonder what happens if I do string of the boolean. Let's see if that works. So has even number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, for each iteration in this loop, I am going to print what number I'm looking at and if we have an even number yet. Actually, I'm gonna put this over here. All right, let me try it again so that we're looking at it and then we know the results. Having even number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. If we step through this function, we have the list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then on the first iteration, I'm looking at number 1. So at number 1, we know that there's still no even number. When we're looking at 2, we know that there's an even number now because we saw the number 2. But we're still looking at 3, we're still looking at 4, and we're still looking at 5. We're wasting all these iterations. We don't need to, because the moment we see an even number, we know that the list contains an even number. So all of this is kind of useless work. But what if we add the break function? So as you can see, if I call the same function now, even number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what happens is it only looks at 1 and 2, because the moment it sees an even number, it breaks and it goes all the way to the return statement. So that means we were able to prevent the loop from reading 3, 4, 5 because it's useless. You don't need to. And I could add a huge list. It doesn't matter because the moment you see an even number, it's gonna stop. However, if you take off the break, then if you give it a huge list, it's gonna waste its time. Look at that. Look at how many iterations it went through, right? So there you go. That's the power of breaks. Now let's look at continue, which is very similar, but instead of going outside of the loop, it just goes to the next iteration. So continue. All right. Here you see in the while loop, we have a test expression and condition, and then continue. You see the arrow? Instead of going directly here, what it does, it goes to the next iteration. So for example, if you have the list 1, 2, 3, 4 to go through, and then this condition, imagine if it says I is modulo 2 equals 0. So what this means would be if it's an even number, then just continue. And here, let's pretend that I added the function print. What do I want to print? Print, I'm odd. So here's what would happen. If I equals 1, then I modulo 2 is not 0, so it will not go through this continue statement. So it would go here, it would print I'm odd because I'm an odd number, haha. But then the next iteration, I becomes 2. Let's say I had I plus equals 1. Let's say I equals 2 now, and 2 is an even number. And because it's an even number, I will go to continue. And because I go continue, I will not go through the rest of the loop. I will go to the next iteration of the loop. It's not going to come out of the loop yet, but it will go to the next iteration of the loop. So almost the same thing, but instead of breaking out the whole loop and going to the next statement, we're just going to go to the next iteration of the loop. So let's see an example. Okay, I'm going to run this. So for the continue example, I want you to write a function that determines how much tips you've received, and then you only print thank you for the people who tipped you $5 or more, because the people who tipped you less than $5, they don't deserve a thank you. So you have tips, which is the list, and then how would you do this? Okay, let's think about it. So first you want to loop through the array or the list. So for tip in tips, okay, what are you going to do with the tip? Well, first, actually you have to also determine how much tips you receive. So let's just say total tips received. We'll initialize it as 0. And then what we want to do is we want to add it to total tips because we want to sum it. All right, so you're going to be adding tip to it. And then what you want to do is say thank you. And then let's look at the example output. You want to say thanks for, and then $ the amount. So print thanks for $, and then you add the number as a string, tip. Okay, and then, don't forget, you have to print the total tips. All right, let's try this out. Receive tips, and then let's say 10, 5, 5, 2. So you received $10 tip from someone, then $5 tip from someone, and $2. Aha. So it says thanks for $10, thanks for $5, thanks for $2, and then you get $17. All right. So how would you use continue to prevent printing this? So let's see. You don't want to say thank you for people who tip less than $5. So if tip is smaller than 5, then you continue. So what that means is you're not going to go through here. You are going to go directly to the next iteration. All right, so let's try that. Receive tips. All right, let's give it more tips. 10, 5, 2, 4, 6, 100. Oh yeah. And then maybe another $4 tip. So as you can see, it only says thanks for the ones that are above, or $5 and above. So it skipped 2, it skipped 4, and then it skipped the last 4. And then it also outputs the total amount. And that total amount is not just the ones that you thank. So if you add this all up, this gives you 121, but this is 131 because you're still receiving the tips from the people you don't thank. So yeah, so there you go. That's the power of continue. Is imagine if you don't want to do the rest of the loop, but you don't want to break out the loop. You just want to go to the next iteration. So yeah, so that's the power of continue. So just for a fun exercise, why don't we try to write this without continue? How would you do it? So this is not really related to continue. This is more related to, thinking creatively and using the tools you have. Imagine if I never taught you the keyword continue. How would you do it? Well, you know that you don't want to print anything here. So what you can do is instead just do the opposite, right? If tip is greater or equal than 5, then you say thanks. Let's see if that works. Oops, receive tips 1, 5, 10, 2, 6. Yep, and there you go. So of course that was a toy example because you could easily do it without continue. This is probably also a toy example with the break, but it allows you to understand what break and continue actually are. All right, cool. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.